Chapter 9. Whoa! Dawn cried as Skip took a quick few steps backward, almost stumbling over a root. The zombie woman gurgled and lurched forward, gesturing wildly. She looked worse than ever. Her hair looked like a rat's nest, and her face was streaked with dirt and drool. "Who are you?" Dawn cried. "What do you want?" The zombie woman only grunted in response. Then she leapt forward, flinging a handful of leaves at the horse. That was all Skip could take. Spinning around, he gathered his haunches and launched himself down the trail at a gallop. "Whoa!" Skip stopped. Dawn yelled, her heart racing. She'd lost control of the reins when the horse bolted and one of her feet had come out of the stirrup. It was all she could do to cling on for dear life. She barely stayed in the saddle as Skip raced toward home. He slowed down a little as he skidded around the turn onto the blue trail, and Dawn managed to jam her foot back into the stirrup and gather up the reins. A few yards from the stable, she was finally able to bring Skip back to a brisk trot and then a walk. Dawn caught her breath and looked around. Luckily, nobody saw them returning. She could hear the lesson still going on, but the riding ring was out of view around the corner of the barn. Dawn was relieved she didn't want to get in trouble on her first day at the new stable. Sliding down from the saddle, Dawn realized her whole body was trembling. "You saw her too, right, Skip?" she whispered, stroking the horse's sweaty neck. "Too bad you can't talk. Maybe then somebody might believe me." Dawn wanted to tell Ms. Kazemi about the scary zombie woman. But why bother? Her own parents hadn't believed her last time. Besides, she didn't want the stable owner to find out she'd left the marked trail. By the time Dawn finished untacking Skip and walking him around to cool him off, the lesson still hadn't finished. Usually, Dawn loved hanging around stables even when she wasn't riding, but today she just wanted to get home. She left a note for Luna and took off on her bike. "Hi," Dawn said as she slid into the back seat of the Donovans' car the next morning. "Thanks for letting me ride with you." "You're welcome, Dawn." Mr. Donovan was a pale man with a quiet voice and sad gray eyes. "The twins have told me so much about you." Dawn just smiled politely. How could they have told him anything? They barely knew her. Jake was in the front seat. "Morning, Dawn," he said in his usual friendly way. "Morning," Dawn said. She was nervous about starting a new school, even though she'd assured her dad that she didn't need him to take her in on the first day. But seeing the twins made her feel a little better. At least she already had some friends at Vesper County Junior High. Jane leaned closer and sniffed as Dawn put on her seatbelt. "Is that Les Kay's?" she asked, sounding impressed. "Yeah," Dawn said, pleased. She had dabbed on a generous amount of her perfume that morning. She couldn't help worrying that the zombie smells from Vespertine might stick to her clothes or hair. "My parents got it for me." "Lucky," Jane said. "I tried to get Dad to buy me some for my birthday, but they didn't have it at the lame little mall in East Valley." "Too bad," Dawn said. "You can use some of mine if you want." "Really?" Jane's eyes lit up. "Awesome. That's really nice of you, Dawn." Dawn returned her smile. Then she glanced out the window. The twins' father had taken a shortcut, and they were already driving past Mrs. Tompkins's house on the way out of town. Soon, they were on the winding road down the mountain. Dawn felt herself relax more and more the farther they got from Vespertine. Maybe the next few weeks wouldn't be so terrible after all. She would get to spend every school day with the twins in East Valley. In between, she could hang out at the barn and try to ignore the zombie smells. Before she knew it, her birthday would be here and she could start working on her parents to move back home. Either that, or her birthday would come and her life as she knew it would be over. But she wouldn't think about that possibility. East Valley was a little bigger than Vesper Time, with several fast food restaurants, a mall, and even a bowling alley. The school was a squat brick building atop a hill. As they pulled up, tons of kids were hanging out in the parking lot and on the front walk. It all looked so normal that Dawn almost cried. But she got a hold of herself just in time. "Ready," Jane said. Dawn thanked Mr. Donovan for the ride, then climbed out of the car and followed the twins toward the door. Jane had her backpack slung over one shoulder. With her other hand, she was fiddling with a silver charm hanging on a thin chain around her neck. "Cool necklace." Dawn leaned closer for a better look. The charm was a unique-looking squiggle with a little star in the middle. "I've never seen one like that." "It was my mom's," Jane said. "It used to be one half of her favorite pair of earrings. Dad says I used to play with them when I was a baby." Her eyes went all distant for a second. "It's the only thing I have of hers. The other earring was buried with her." "Oh." Dawn felt a little awkward. She'd figured out that the twins' mother wasn't around, but she hadn't realized that it was because she died. For some reason, Dawn had assumed she'd gotten fed up with the zombie lifestyle and left. Maybe because that was exactly what Jane claimed she wanted to do when she grew up. How did she die?" Dawn blurted out. Jane's expression darkened. "I don't want to talk about it," she snapped. Spinning on her heel, she marched into the school without a backward glance. "Sorry about that." Jake came up beside Dawn. "She's a little sensitive about our mom." He shrugged. "Mostly because Dad won't tell us exactly how she died. Just that it was some kind of disease. Like it's not bad enough we have to worry about minus what." Shooting a glance toward the mountain looming in the distance, he rolled his eyes. "We also have to wonder if we're going to come down with cancer or something too." He didn't sound very worried, though. Dawn wondered if he ever worried much about anything. He didn't seem to. That was one of the things she liked about him. Being around him almost made her forget to worry about stuff too. "Come on," he said. "You probably need to stop in at the office to pick up your schedule. I'll show you where it is." By the end of fourth period, Dawn was already feeling at home at VCJH. It was nice to be back in the normal world again. She walked out of English class with Jake and Jane. "Time for my favorite class of the day," Jake said. "Lunch." Soon, Dawn was following the twins through the crowded cafeteria to their usual table. 3 kids were already seated there. Jane pointed to each of them in turn. "That's Xander," she said. "And Yasmin, and Zach." "XYZ," Dawn said. "Cool." Zach grinned at her. He was tall and gangly with spiky blonde hair and big ears. "Uh-oh. You might be too smart to sit with us," he said. "Or at least with Yas." Yasmin, a pretty dark-haired girl, punched him in the arm. "So, Dawn, where are you from?" she asked. "You don't live in the same weirdo town as the twins, do you?" "She does." "Lucky her." Jake glanced up from unwrapping his sandwich and grinned. "She's stuck with us weirdos." Dawn smiled uncertainly. What were they talking about? She got the outside world didn't know anything about the zombies in Vespertine. Jane shot Dawn a warning look. "Dawn hasn't lived there long," she told the others breezily. She probably hasn't even heard all the rumors about Z-Corp yet. Yeah. Xander stared at Dawn. He had a short afro and glasses. Hey Dawn, it sounds like you've got the sniffles. I hope you're not already poisoned by living up there. What do you mean? Until that moment, Dawn hadn't really even noticed that her nose was running. She coughed, then grabbed a napkin and blew her nose. Obviously that mild cold she'd noticed yesterday was still hanging around. Jake laughed. That's one of the rumors. People think Z-Corp dumps dangerous chemicals in the woods outside Vespertine. What? Dawn exclaimed, thinking about the clean, well-run lab where her mother worked. What do you mean? Scary, right? Yasmin's eyes widened. My older sister is really into the environment and stuff, and she thinks they've totally poisoned the air and water up there. She says it's only a matter of time before people start coming down with weird diseases and stuff. Zack snorted. Your sister's nuts. He shot a sidelong look at Dawn. Still, you've gotta wonder. Hey Dawn, can you feel yourself growing tentacles or anything? He wiggled his fingers at her. Or seen any three-headed monsters running around the woods? Xander added with a grin. Not yet. Dawn tried to sound normal, but the mention of monsters in the woods made her flash back to that weird zombie woman. It also made her want to tell these kids that those silly rumors weren't true. Z-Corp was all about helping people while helping zombies, actually, not hurting them. She sneaked a look at the twins. Neither of them seemed bothered by what the other kids were saying. Jane was sipping her chocolate milk calmly, and Jake was laughing along with the other guys. Okay, if it didn't bother them, she was going to try not to let it bother her. Still, she was starting to wonder if going to school here was going to be quite as normal as she'd hoped.